Okay, in this in-class lecture and exercise, we're going to continue to build on the in-class project that we started. It's a web comic, and we're going to be learning a little bit about HTML formatting. So you really want to make sure that you have the first exercise done. And I will walk you through all the steps that you'll need for this, and everything that we're going to cover you'll be repeating in your own project for your own comic. So as you're working on the in-class exercise, you might want to think in the back of your head, how can I apply this to my website? All right, so let's go ahead and look at the files that we're going to need. All right, if you don't have the class exercise website, I have Dreamweaver open here with the About page open. And let me just show you that again. We'll go to the, where is it? There it is. Here are my site files. And I have an About page. Let me get rid of this one. We have an About page called index.html in the About folder. And when I opened it, it looks like this. This is the code that we're already starting to see. And make sure that in Dreamweaver you are in code view. Later in this class we'll learn about design and live view and split view. For now I want you to stay in code view. If you don't have these files, you can come to the class exercise, and I have posted the last version at the end of Module 1. So you can download where we're currently at the end of Module 1. Once you get that, you're going to get a zipped file. Generally on the Macintosh, as soon as you download it, it unzips it for you and shows you your folder. If it doesn't do that, then sometimes all you have to do is double click it or right click it and it'll uncompress. There'll be an expand option. And you can just go ahead and put that on your desktop or wherever it's easy to find on your computer. Once you have that, we'll have this page. This is where we left off with everything. And just to briefly summarize, the last place that we left off, we had placed all this content. We had learned a lot about all these HTML tags. We have body, everything goes in the body. That's what we can see on the page. Notice there's the start and end tag for body. So everything in here is what we can see on the page. In the head, we have information about the web page itself that's used for the browser and sometimes search engines, but this isn't really anything that the visitor sees. If somebody did a search on Google and the page came up, Google usually pulls the title as the main part of, as the title of the page, and that's in blue text and you could click on that. So sometimes it's good to have a title that works really well or it's enticing for people to click on. In the last quiz, somebody asked, what is UTF-8? UTF-8 is Universal Typeface for the browser. If we were building a website for a different language, such as French, Russian, Chinese, that uses different characters, we would have to change and set that. But this is generally standard English character fonts, but if we do anything different or strange, we need to do it in the UTF-8 format. If you're building websites in the United States, 99% of the time you're going to be using UTF-8. If you're doing a different language, you'd have to look up what character set you need to set that to. And probably just a Google search for that, or there are other sources to find out where the character sets are. Okay, let's keep going. The first thing we need to do is we've already created a lot of placeholder text. And we got this from Lorem Ipsum. So if you don't have that, you'll want to go ahead and put that in, and we've added paragraphs for each one of the paragraphs in the text. And this helps, gives it, paragraphs are important because if the text all just runs together, that gets hard to read. So part of proximity says use paragraphs. Now generally speaking, even, well, let's see, how do I put this? Sometimes in your English class, they'll tell you create a new paragraph when you have a new idea. And that's generally good advice in web as well. But if we wait too long, we still get too long of paragraphs. So even if we're still on the same idea, I generally have a rule of thumb that every 3 to 5 sentences, I'll create a paragraph. So this paragraph right here is a little long on the web browser. So if I come down here, there's a little globe. I can click preview in Firefox. This will bring up my website. This paragraph right here is kind of long. And even this one up here is a bit long. So generally for design, this is my rule of thumb. I don't know if this is anyone else's. So you can use this as you wish. But I would probably come in here and create another paragraph tag here to close that one out and start a new one here. So we've added paragraphs, and now I'm going to show you how we can create some formatting. Now formatting is different than styling, so don't get those two confused. There is formatting that we do on the HTML page. Styling we do in our style sheet, and we're going to do that later. In a later module we'll talk about styles, and that's how we control what the website looks like. But we're talking just now about formatting, and we actually have some formatting already when we did an unordered list. So that's what creates the little bullets like this. That would be considered formatting. When we assign an H tag, that's also formatting because it's sort of a title or a subtitle. In this case, we're going to use small print to make our copyright statement down at the bottom smaller than the rest of the text. And it's going to be relative to the font size, but we can do it with what's called a format. So here, for me on my site, it happens to be line 59, so yours would be on the same line if you downloaded the website, or if you did this yourself, you'd be close to line 59. And all I have to do to add formatting around this is type in small in front of the text and then after. Alright, just like that. And notice that it's nested inside the paragraph tags. Let's save that. And let's see what that looks like. So before I hit my refresh screen, down here at the bottom, you can see copyright 2015 Philo Enterprises. That's what it looks like now. And after I refresh, now it's just slightly smaller. So that can be a nice thing. Maybe you had referenced something in your paragraph text. You don't really want it the same size, and you want it offset just by size every once in a while. That is a very simple format that you can add to your HTML text. Let's go on to the next thing. Emphasizing text. Now, hopefully you've read this in your reading. But if we ever want something emphasized, for instance, I want people to know, and I want search engines to know, that this content is really about a web comic. Alright, so here is the word web comic in my content. To add emphasis, I put the tags EM in front of it, and then immediately after I close the EM. So then it looks like that. The default style for emphasis in any web browser is italicized. So if I save this, come back here, here is the word webcomic. As soon as I refresh this, that should italicize. And there we go. Simple as that. So that's really all emphasis does. And what we're going to learn here is that we've got some other tags that we add, and visually the only clue that we have that that tag's been applied is going to be italicization, or how you pronounce that, italics. I guess I have to learn how to say that word. But we're going to talk about a different one first. But that's really, default-wise, that's all it does. Now, once we start building our style sheets, we apply an emphasis tag, we can have it do other things as well if we wanted to. For now, we're just going to leave the default style. Let's go back to our page. So that's an emphasis. Pretty simple. We have another thing called strong. Now I could also make webcomic strong. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do strong, and I'm going to nest the M tag inside it. So this is kind of made, so now it's going to be bold and italics. All right. And I can add strong somewhere else. I'm just going to pick somewhere kind of random in my lorem ipsum. Maybe this word palantesque. You can pick any word you want. But I'm also going to choose the word, actually let's do a phrase, palantesque habitant morbi trisque. So we got 4 words in that. And strong is HTML5 way of bold. In the old days, not that long ago, we used to use the B. And that was and for some older browsers that still works. The new browsers, we're getting rid of B. So don't use B. Maybe I shouldn't have even showed you that. But if you ever see a B, that lets you know that somebody coded that to be bold, but the new style sheet says use strong. Why they decide that, I'm not exactly sure. I thought B would be fewer characters, but maybe it was causing other confusion that they thought needed to be clarified. All right, so I've created this as strong here, and I have strong here with an emphasis nested inside it. Let's go ahead and save. Come back to Firefox. So here's the word webcomic, and then where's my, somewhere down here is going to be, what did I gotta remember what palantesque habitant. It's after more about the character. So more about the character is right here, and here's palantesque habitus morbi tristique. That's fancy lorem ipsum for you. So this will bold now once I hit refresh. There you go. So it now is bolded, and so is webcomic. Webcomic is both bolded and in italics, both bold and italics. Another thing that we would have is called a site. So I'm going to create a new, let's see here, I'm going to write a new paragraph. Just somewhere in here, it'll be right before my last one. So I always start with the open and close tags and then put my cursor in between to start this. The story of Philo parallels Homer's The Odyssey. And if you're familiar with Greek literature, Homer was the guy who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, 2 books that talk about, now in this case, maybe Now some people would put Odyssey in quotations. You can do that. I mean, you can, depends upon what kind of literal formatting you're applying to your website. But in this case, I'll go ahead and keep the double quotes, but I also want to italicize it. But while I'm italicizing it, I can go ahead and say I'm going to cite this. Now, cite means that I'm referencing a particular work of literature. That's probably the best way to describe cite. So you're telling, especially search engines, that there's another document or another book or form of literature that we are citing, and that's why we're italicizing. I'm not necessarily drawing emphasis to it. I'm italicizing it because I'm referencing a book. So as we italicize, we're trying to tell the search engines especially what this web page is about. And we do that through these semantic markups, which also have visual formatting effects to the visual user. So I've added cite around the word Odyssey after I added this paragraph. Go ahead and hit save. So it should show up right in here once I refresh. And there it is. The story of Philo parallels Homer's The Odyssey. And Odyssey was given the cite tag, which visually italicizes it. Next, we're going to introduce a quote. All right. And I'll add another paragraph right below that. Philo's favorite quote of his own, I'll put of his own in parentheses, is, and use double quote again, what fun is it if you're not having fun? Okay, so we've got a quote here. And what I can also do is offset this. Now, one thing that we wanted to do that we haven't shown you yet is what's called a line break. Okay, so we're going to be creating a line break. Let me put a quotation there. Let me actually do something else first. I'm going to end a paragraph there, and we're going to put this quote on a different line. I'm going to get rid of that paragraph tag. So right now this is all sitting there by itself without a paragraph tag around it. Instead, we're going to write block quote. I went ahead and capitalized the W in what, and then we close block quote. So that's the markup for a quote. Let's hit save, and I'll show you what that looks like. And this will have its own default styling. It just depends upon the web browser. And in this case, that's what it did. Now it doesn't put it in italics. So if you wanted to add italics, we come back to our code. And I don't know, some people would argue it would be best to put cite to make it, but it's not referencing, this isn't the name of a book. So if this was me, I would not use cite, I would use emphasis. And a lot of web designers wish there was an italics for just when you want italics and not necessarily an emphasis. This emphasis is sort of saying, hey, this is what our web page is about, but that's not really why I'm applying the italics. You can try to use the old formatting of just I for italics, but my understanding is that's no longer the proper code for italics, and I'm not even sure what Dreamweaver will do with it. I guess Dreamweaver is allowing it to stay italics. It'll work in some browsers. You might get an issue with I for italics, just like you would get bold for a B, but it does work here in Firefox. So I'm going to let you wrestle with that yourself. Some people would say never use the old code and you should use emphasis, but I'll leave that up to you. In my opinion, I'm not trying to emphasize this, but the only other code out there for doing just italics, because this is something that somebody said, is often we put the format of narrative in italics, something that's spoken. I'll leave this as an I for now, that's fine. I want to show you one more thing though. Before this block quote, let's put a single line return, and after this italics, we're going to put a line break. A line break is simply the open bracket, angle bracket, with a BR underscore / and then the close angle bracket. And then on the next line, before the end of the block quote, I'm going to do, on the Mac, this is Option Shift to get a long end dash. If you're using a PC, you might have to use your map character to figure out how to create that character. But on the Mac, it's Shift, Option, and then the minus sign, and it gives you a long dash. So what fun is it if you're not having fun? And that was by Philo. So what this does, unlike a paragraph return, excuse me, unlike a paragraph return, it's only going to give a single line break. Paragraphs always have two. So when we look at this, anytime we enter a paragraph, we have a whole line space in between. That's generally how we denote paragraphs in web. In print, we often have indentation, and then the next paragraph doesn't have a line space in between it. We denote paragraphs by indentation. In web, we're not so concerned about saving vertical space as we are in print, so it's easier on the eye to break things up with a line as far as our proximity goes. But now that I've added this, watch what happens to the quote. I'm going to make sure I save it, which I didn't do. You'll do that a couple times. There we go. So you can see how Philo is on a separate line, but it's only one line below. Now, I wouldn't do this a lot. The idea of HTML is to try to be as clean code as possible. You really don't want to just have tons and tons and tons of single line breaks on your web page. And you certainly, some people are going to be tempted to, well, how do I get even more space between text? Because visually that's what I want to do. I could just create a bunch of line breaks. You can do that. It's not good coding though. All right, so as much as possible, you need to do everything just in straight HTML. If you want to add special spacing behind things, we need to do that in our style sheet. So we could always say, hey, if I want a whole lot more space after a quote, then we would do that in our style sheet and set bottom margins to push content down. Okay? So don't do it by trying to add line spaces. We'll do it later if we need to with styling. That's a line break. We also have something called a definition. So let's see here. So if we had to define something, and maybe something we didn't really even know what it was, we could say, let's create a definition of some. I'm going to add this to my very first paragraph where it starts with Philo is a webcomic, and we're just going to write, sometimes the story is told as a drabble. And in parentheses, a 100-word story. Now in this case, I might want to italicize the word drabble, but the reason why I'm italicizing it isn't for emphasis. It's not a cite. It's not even a quote or citation or narrative. In this case, it's a definition. So there's markup for definition, and it's DFN. And we'll close that. Once again, visually, all this is going to do is italicize it. But it tells us why we italicized it as the markup. So we come back here to our web browser, added it to very first paragraph, and there it is. Sometimes the story is told as a drabble, and drabble is italicized. So that's definition. Sometimes we add a superscript. Let's see here. So in superscript, let me find a good place to put it. I'll put one here. We talked about a Greek philosopher. So I'm going to add a superscript for a Greek philosopher right after the word philosopher. And let's see, where is it? There's Greek philosopher. Actually, let's add a copyright instead. Sorry. So after the word philo, I'm going to use Option G to create the character copyright. On the PC, you'll have to do the character map to find that out. But on the Macintosh, it's Option G. That creates the copyright symbol. Now, what's going on here is the copyright symbol is the same size as all the other text. I can show you what that looks like. If I hit refresh. See how the copyright symbol and all of the letters in the word philo are all the same size. That seems kind of hard to read. So I'm going to superscript this copyright symbol to have it smaller and move up on the baseline. The way I do that is around on each side of that copyright, I just start with SUP and I close with SUP. So now the copyright symbol is surrounded by the superscript markup. So let's save that and see how that changes the appearance. Again, this is really just formatting. And there you go. It raised the copyright off the line. I think that makes that a little easier to read. That superscript. Sometimes we want to highlight some things. I would use this sparingly. It can really start to look like an eyesore and your website really look pretty nasty. But we have this quote down here, what fun is it if you're not having fun? Let's highlight it, almost kind of like how I selected it here. I'll show you what that looks like. So come back down here to the block quote. And all we need to do is on each side, inside the emphasis, and it doesn't really matter if I do which one's nested in one, in which in this case. So we could put it outside the quotes and we write the word mark. And then make sure you have everything properly nested. Now the close has to be after the italicized. All right, so now I have added the highlight tag markup, and I have nested the italics inside it. So let's save and let's see what that looks like. it should give this a yellow box. There you go. And that's highlight. Now the default color for highlight is this yellow. It's as if somebody took one of those yellow highlight markers and went whoosh. All right, it's something to draw attention to it. And you can see that this yellow is pretty bright. It has a very stark contrast compared to the rest of the page. And likely once we start coloring our website, unless we're using that bright yellow in our design, which is a little harsh of a yellow, this becomes an eyesore. Now you can change the color through styling if you want to. And then that way, if you have a need for markup throughout your site, you can do so. But this certainly draws attention to it, but if you did it all over your website, it becomes quite the eyesore. And I would say even just once, this is quite the eyesore. But you now know how to do it, if you need to. And we talked about a line break. Now the other thing we're going to do is add a language. So let's say somewhere in my content I had, let's see here, I got this block quote, but maybe I add something to, let's add something to this H2 tag where it says about the world in which Philo lives. And we're going to use the word agora. And let's see here. Around the word agora, or actually, I'm going to create a span tag. And I wonder if there's a better way I could do this. And there's the span. Span is a way of calling out inline text. I mean, it's really a neutral tag that you're applying, but by putting a span around it, we can add certain types of information to it that's separate from everything else. So if I need to be able to apply styling to just this word, which is on a line, I don't want to apply it to the entire H2 tag. I just want to apply it to this word or set of words. That's how we pick it out, is by using what's called a span. Now we don't want to use a lot of spans. We use this very sparingly, but sometimes you have to. In this case, we're going to do a span because we want to be able to tell the web engines and even web readers that this word is actually a different language. In this case, language equals Greek, and I may have to, let's see here, we'll just put Greek, and actually I think there is a different word for Greek. I'm going to pause this video and look it up. Hold on. Okay, I'm back, and we found out that the language is not Greek, it is EG. Right, and you can find those. I happen to find a website that, not the right one. Let's see, I found a website that has meta languages, so here they all are. So if I had a different language, I could have just picked any one of these. So you can see Spanish would be ES, and they're not necessarily going to be how we spell them in English. In Italian is IT, so that one's easy, but Hebrew would be IW. So you really have to check out what they're going to be to figure out what to use for the two-letter. And even English is EN, so American English in some cases. All right, so that's where I got it. It's EL for Greek. And why would that matter? Why would I need to tell, this word is Greek? In this case, this isn't maybe the best example, but if this was Spanish, and if I had La Familia, all right, and I had set this to Spanish, what that does is it's going to do two things. One, certainly the search engines are going to realize that you've used a foreign word inside your English text. So it can go, oh, that's actually a real word. We know what that word is because we know what that is in Spanish. But if I hadn't set that, it might think you made a spelling error and you don't know what you're talking about. Likewise, for people who are using the devices that read the website to them, there's a good chance that if you designate the language, it's going to pronounce the word properly in that language for them. So in this case, about the world in which Philo lives, and that's not really a good example, but it would then go La Familia, because you've told it it's in Spanish. But if you didn't, and it was trying to read that in English, La Familia, right? And then it would sound really pretty bad. So that really helps it out by adding a local span just around those words. Let me change this back to Greek. And we said that was EN. No, that's English. Greek was EL. I don't have all of these memorized. I would always have to look that up. And I'll change the word back to agora. All right. And we hit save. And really all this is going to do, now even though it's nested inside an H2 tag, the H2 tag is still going to look like a title, but this agora should now be italicized inside of it. And no, it's not going to italicize. We would still have to add emphasis tags to italicize that. This just tells it it's a different language. If I really wanted to italicize it also, I could add the emphasis tags. And now we come back to Firefox, and now it's italicized. So visually, if you change something in a different language, there isn't a visual representation, although you could add that in styling later. I'm not sure that that's something that's very common to do, but you could style it differently if we saw that a certain tag had been applied to the HTML code. All right, and that's really it for HTML formatting. Not a whole lot to it. Those are the very common ones. I don't actually even think of any other ones that I use on a regular basis, but it's important to know that formatting. And keep that in mind, that this is formatting, that it's not, that this is not styling. Styling's coming soon enough, but this is all ways to format your HTML. And there are other videos that you can watch related to the module assignment that you're going to need to know how to do. You're going to need to know relative URLs, and you're going to need to know how to optimize images. So make sure you're watching those videos as well before you begin your project. But everything else that we've covered in this video should prepare you for the class project in Module 2. All right, and that's it. That's HTML formatting.